Welcome back, folks, to another edition of the Serious Angler Podcast. Today, we are Baileyless, but this is a wonderful episode of our Seriously Western segment. Bailey always gives me crap if I miss a fantasy fishing show because of, I don't know, an emergency or certain things. And he's in East Texas now fishing, and apparently the service is bad. All jokes aside, East Texas. Wow. Okay, East Texas sucks with service, and hopefully he's catching a bunch of fish down there. But this is a special edition of the Seriously Western show, and guys, we've got a great one today. Number one, this show is brought to you by our friends over at Amped Outdoors. It's our choice for lithium batteries, and boy, they perform flawlessly for me on the Pro Am over in on Don Pedro. Don Pedro. I don't know how to say it, but wonderful lake. Holy cow, what a place! And just wanted to shout out and say thanks to the folks that reached out. Gosh, this was an outpouring amount of text messages, Instagram messages, phone calls. Really appreciate everyone reaching out. Super, super kind and just blessed to have kind of people behind me cheering me on, even though I don't catch fish most of the time. But today's show, nonetheless, is a great one. Bryant Smith and I, who is just a heck of a guy, we sit down and we chat about his red hot start in Florida, finishing really, really well. Strong start to the year for him on the Elite Series. We actually connect it back to the West Coast, as in seriously Western fashion. Kind of compare the Delta to Florida fisheries and his take on that. A lot of good info in this just on cold fronts, whether that be in Florida or not, and the way that he sort of has broke things down. So we catch up with Bryant and hear about everything he has going. That is what today's show is about. So tune in and give things a listen. All right, and folks, now we are joined by the one and only Bryant Smith, back in California after a heck of a
Mhm.
start on the Elite Series, man, starting 2025 strong. How's it feel to be home?
Oh, it feels good. This the first trip is always one of the longer ones just because this time I had to go pick up my boat from the bass tank, spend a few days there going over everything, making sure everything was good, and of course it was. And then I went to Tennessee to go break the motor in, had to break the Yamaha in, and that's always a process. And then get down there a few days before St. John's, practice, fish the tournament, back to back with Okeechobee. And then I actually went and pre-practiced. Well, not really pre-practice. I drove around the Pascatonk River just to see what that was all about. And then four plane rides in one day, and we were finally home. So that was about a month. And it's definitely good to be home, especially with the little one and my wife. I was worried they wouldn't recognize me with how long I'd been gone.
I love it. I love it, man. Well, I'm glad you made it home safely. So 4 plane rides. What the heck
Oh,
was
yeah.
that about?
Yeah. So, of course, I managed to schedule it when a giant front just blew across the entire eastern part of the United States. And I woke up. I was supposed to have a 5:45 flight. And I woke up, checked my phone, and I had a notification. It's like, "Hey, your 5:45 plane is now departing at 12:10." I'm like, "Oh, well, that's nowhere close to like nowhere close to what we were aiming for." So I got on there, I got on the app, and I rebooked a flight. And I made the mistake of booking one to Minneapolis. And I don't know how many of your viewers know how cold and snowy it is up there, but it was we had quite the snow delay up there. They had a blizzard going on and everything like that. So that caused me. It was like a 3 hour delay there to get all this. There was like a foot of snow on the wings and everything, and then they had to do the whole de-icer thing. We had about a 3.5 hour delay there, which caused me to miss my next flight in Vegas home. So I had to rebook that, and that ended up being a plane ride to LA and then finally back home. So four planes in one day, would not recommend that at all.
Dude, that's brutal.
It was pretty bad.
I don't think I've ever been on more than 3. in one day. And that was like, all
Yeah.
right, well, that was that's like being a bass fisherman. I think I'd rather drive 15 hours straight than be on 3 plane rides in a day.
Dude, I got into Vegas and it crossed my mind if I was going to have to wait that much longer. It crossed my mind. I'm like, Vegas is only, especially in a rental car, like I can blaze down the highway at, 85 and, it was tempting to just jump in a car and go, but we got it figured out. And my original time of landing was supposed to be about 10:30 a.m. West Coast time, and I didn't get in until 7:30 p.m. So it was a long day. Part of the part of the living the dream package that we all sign up for.
There you go. I love it. I love it, man. Good stuff. Well, man, give us a little breakdown. I mean, so basically on pulling up stats here. So St. John's finished 30th and Okeechobee 19th, man. I mean, heck of a two derbies. Florida is always that, seems guys either start their year really strong or they put themselves in a heck of a deficit. Give us a little breakdown on each event and what you learned and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So St. John's, a lot of our guys have a lot of experience there because it's a very common stop. And I've only been there one other time, which was last year, and it was later in the year. And I actually spent probably of the 2 practice days, and I only fished 2 tournament days because I suck. I probably spent maybe 6 hours on the actual river. So this year it was a little bit different because we weren't allowed to lock into Rodman, which is basically where I had all my experience there. So I was pretty much starting at zero. We were starting with no experience there. But Florida, it's always kind of fit my style. Coming up from the Delta and Clear Lake, a lot of grass fisheries, tidal, all that stuff. So I had just leaned on that experience and just covered as much water. And my whole thing with Florida is I try to find an area that I feel like I can spend 8 hours in.
Mhm.
I don't want to run around a lot in Florida. I always, when I tend to run around, far, not, I want to stay within, a certain mile radius. I don't want to be running 20 minutes here, running 20 minutes there, not all over the place. I want my trolling motor down in Florida. So I spent a lot of time just trying to find an area on the St. John's that I felt comfortable in to spend the whole tournament. And I did that. It actually ended up being up north, which, you know, I think this tournament most was probably the most checks ever cut taking a left out of Palatka, which was really interesting. I
Yeah.
don't know if it was just because of the cold weather we had. Those fish, and it made sense in my head. If you run down, the further down you run, the warmer the water gets, the further along you get. But when a cold front hits down there, it's going to affect that water temp a little more. And I felt like it was going to shut down those fish a little more. So I ended up, I obviously practiced down there, but I was lucky enough to have an area up north that I felt like I got a handful of bites, caught one good one. It's like, okay, I feel like I can hunker down in here. Hopefully that cold front doesn't affect them as much just because that water's, I mean, the difference in water temp, like between Aster, I don't know how familiar you are with the names of everything down there, but Aster's like 40 something miles down the lake. And I ended up going almost 30 miles north. And there was a 5 degree temperature difference just in that stretch. So I knew at least those fish shouldn't have been as affected from the cold front. That water couldn't drop as much. So anyway, long story short, I kind of found an area that I felt comfortable in. And it was kind of a fun bite, just fishing lily pads and out in front of lily pads. It was kind of cool watching those fish move with the tide. But I was just throwing a striking hack pack swim jig with a rage crawl on the back. And, conventionally, I'm always doing the Alabama shake with that. And it was weird because they actually preferred it just reeling it. And the whole thing with the pads,
Yes.
Well, yeah, it was really interesting, and I think it was more because those fish were a little bit down. They weren't, there were probably some spawning, some pre-spawn at the bases of everything, but they weren't high up in the water column on there. So the whole key was making sure that jig was not coming out of the water and slowing my retrieve down, almost like slow rolling it like you would a spinnerbait, actually triggered a lot more bites for me as opposed to keeping it really high in the water column, keeping it, kind of skipping across the top. But that was pretty much it. Day two, I did find some jerkbait fish that I ended up weighing in, but for the most part, the majority of my weight was throwing that swim jig in those lily pads, slow reeling it out. Really, really strange way to do a swim jig in my eye, just that slow reel. But a lot of those fish were staging, so I would catch a bunch of males up on the bank. They were peeing, getting ready. You could tell that they were like, hey, it's time to go do my thing. But the females were actually, I would say they were on because the pad fields there are huge. It can
Mhm.
be 30, 40, 50 feet to the bank of just pads. And all those females were on that either outside of the pads, just outside of the pads, or like that first 10 foot inside those pads, just kind of staging there, I think, ready to move up. But it was a good event. It was definitely a grinder of an event, especially after the cold front hit. I was still, those guys blow me away every time with how they can adjust and catch them better, even in a cold front. In Florida, they ended up just staying level at the check line. And I was sweating it after day two. I was like, I had 11 pounds, I think, after a decent day one. I had 11 pounds. I'm like, oh, there's no way. After a 32-degree night in Florida, this cut weight's going to go down. It made it, maybe it dropped a couple ounces. So I was sweating that, but made it to day three and things kind of stabilized a little bit and ended up catching them there pretty good. Good enough to,
Wow.
have a solid start.
Yeah. I mean, the two takeaways that I'm hearing are basically something to think about. And I'm curious your thoughts on this, if this is just a Florida thing and a Florida strain thing, but I feel like it's not a bad thing to think about in general when you're facing a cold front, especially going into a tournament or just going out fishing, is maybe fishing that water that's already cold and there's less of a swing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like in that window. Do you feel like that's just a Florida thing, or do you feel like that could be anywhere?
I think that's anywhere. Um, if I can fish an area, if I have two choices to fish an area, two areas, one after a cold front it's dropped 10 degrees, and one after a cold front it's dropped 5 degrees. I think that just it's a lesser change for them. It's just more stable.
Mm,
I definitely play that in Florida a lot, but there's no doubt that I do that. I do that everywhere. I always try to find that. You want stability. That's the biggest thing, especially with that Florida strain. You want stability. They don't like change, especially for the if it gets colder. So I always try to find the most stable areas, especially in Florida, but I do it all over the country too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I think the other big takeaway I think was just you really slowed down swimming the
Hmm.
jig and
Yep.
just were pulling it through those pads. Whereas, yeah, exactly. I mean, the first thing when I think of swimming a jig is Alabama Shake fast, it's
Hmm.
coming out of the
Yep.
water, just flying through the pads, and they're coming out unglued on it. But really
Yeah.
slowing down is a big factor.
Yeah. And I think it was a really big key because those fish, especially after the cold front happened, but even during it, um, those fish strike zones, it was not very big. You really had to get it close to them. And not only was I slowing it down, keeping that thing down in the water column, keeping it closer to them, but I was also being much more thorough with my casts. Usually I'm chuck it every, 10, 20 feet. And sometimes I was throwing it like 3 foot sections. I would throw it
Wow.
every 3 foot, especially if I was in one of the areas where I had a lot of confidence. And I would really thoroughly pick it apart, just to make sure I didn't leave anything behind. They just didn't, like when they ate it, they ate it. but I
Mhm.
think you had to make it pretty convenient for them. They weren't chasing very much. A lot of them, you could tell they would just the way they ate it, they were coming straight up. They weren't chasing it from behind or eating it head first, coming from a different angle. They were almost always coming straight up. So that was kind of a clue for me. Okay, I need to make sure that I put it over as many fish's heads as possible because their strike zone is not very large right now.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me a little bit, and I think the Delta has a different factor because you also have the northern strain or more of the northern strain fish
Hmm.
being in certain sections. But I noticed that in a Toyota series there a couple of years ago where it was cold, man, right? It was early
Hmm.
and it was pre-spawn, and the part of the lake, which I was not in, but the part of the lake or the system where guys caught them were where it was cold. The water temp
Yep.
was colder, and I mean there was a little bit more of those northern strains involved in there too, but like totally kind of the same thought process. Like this cold front's hitting, and that's those fish that were kind of used to that temperature and there wasn't as big of a drop. Like that's a really interesting point that I quite frankly haven't really thought about when it going into a cold front.
Yeah, I mean, stability is everything, and no matter where you go, it's going to be affected by the cold front. But if you can have a little bit less effect, where it drops the water temp drops less for them, I just feel like that's just better odds of being able to kind of figure them out that day, as opposed to just having them shut down. Which the Florida fish, especially, they are very good at shutting down.
Good at
Um, yeah, yeah, they're pros at shutting down and just not. We're not doing it today. I don't know what your
that. Not
plans are, but
today.
it ain't happening.
Uh-huh. Not today, Captain. Good. Well, now Okeechobee, man, 19th
Mhm.
there. Give us a breakdown on how the Big O went for you.
Yeah, Okeechobee was a weird one. It wasn't your typical Okeechobee. I think everybody can see that from the live coverage and how all the top guys ended up catching them. The lake just was not a player, and that I think that has a couple of factors for that. Um, the dirty water was just everywhere. It was so hard to find that clean water if you weren't in a canal or off the lake walking through somewhere or in the Kissimmee River. It's just that lake was just so unstable. And in practice, it was almost comical how the wind would blow. It started blowing from the north, shifted to the
Okay.
south, shifted blowing out of the east, and then a little bit out of the west. And if anybody's been on Okeechobee before, when that happens, it just pushes that dirty water into those areas. So there was a couple areas with some okay water, some fairly clean water, but even those areas eventually got dirtied up to the point where I won't say it was unfishable, but it wasn't ideal. And the other problem with the lake was it was really low. I guess the Corps of Engineers are finally dropping that lake down to a pretty low water level to kind of entice the growth to come back, entice the grass. Allow the grass to come back and grow, allow the reeds to come back and grow, and kind of build that lake back up a little bit. So we had falling water on top of dirty water on the lake, and that's just not a good scenario for that lake. And it was funny in practice. Like I was totally against fishing a canal. I wanted to find them on the lake because that's where it goes down historically. Um, and my travel partner David Gaston finally clued me in. He was like, "Hey, let's go fish some canals. Like that is the only clean water in this lake. It's the only somewhat stable water in this lake, and it has access to deep water. When the lake's falling, like, dude, you couldn't set down your boat without almost killing your engine every single time because it would just bog down in the in the mud. Oh, it was a pain. It was terrible, and you had to idle a half a mile, three quarters of the mile from where you were fishing just to get enough water to get up on pad. It was so low, and it made it really challenging. So we started fishing a canal. And dude, it was immediate. Like I pulled in there, he went all the way to the back. I started at the front. and we were like, hey, let's go break this down real quick. I had three fish for 15 pounds in about 30 minutes, and I got out of there. I'm like, dude, like this is it. This is where it's going to go down for us. This is the highest bite percentage we've had in any area. So I'm starting here for sure. Obviously, he's going to start there too. He caught a couple of good ones too. So we ended up doing that in a canal, clear water. And the first day, I'd love to have that first day back. So there was a rock levee that went down, and it comes down at a 45, and then it flattens out just a little bit, just a tiny little bit, and it's like a maybe 3 to 4 foot wide flat before it drops down into the dredged out channel.
Okay.
So the first day, and when in practice, I was catching them on the bank. So first day of tournament rolls in, I'm throwing it on the bank, throwing it on the bank, throwing it on the bank, and I caught what I caught, 8 pounds. Um, Day two, I actually made a bad cast, and the wind took it, and it actually probably landed 6 or 7 feet off the bank, and I catch a 6 pounder. I'm like, oh my god, you idiot! You fished over those fish all day yesterday. I thought they just weren't biting. No, the head of literally the head of my trolling motor was going over the top of those fish. So over the you know next couple hours, I started I would make a cast on the bank, make a cast off the bank, on the bank, off the bank, and I caught two good ones off the bank. A couple of I still caught some on the bank too. Like there were still fish on the bank, but I think that key switch right there was just casting just a little bit off and rolling it right over those fish. And I was throwing a Strike King Thunder Cricket, the tungsten one. That's my absolute favorite one. A little blade minnow on the back of that, and just super slow rolling it down on the bottom, ticking the rocks, and it just that little adjustment right there actually saved my tournament big time. One bad cast. That's all it took was one bad cast where it landed off the bank a little bit, and we ended up catching them. I think I had like 21 pounds that second day. And then the third day
Wow.
was cool. Um, so I rolled in there, and it was a little bit warmer. Um, the wind had laid down pretty good, and I started doing the chatterbait thing and caught a couple. I think I caught 3 or 4 doing that, and then I went over. So on one side there's levee rock, and then the other side is kind of more of a natural bank. It has Kissimmee grass, a few mats, all that good stuff. And I started flipping a 6 inch ocho with an 1/8 ounce weight, standard Florida stuff, for spawning fish, and slowing that down a little bit. I ended up figuring out, okay, there was a couple fish that moved up on beds, and I could just flip that thing in there, let it sit super slow, drag it out, and I caught, I think, 3 or 4 of the fish that I ended up weighing on that deal. So that was a cool little adjustment too, seeing those fish kind of progress. Because all those fish that I was catching in there on the thunder cricket were all pre-spawn. They're all super fat, just moved in there, ready to do their thing, and then they actually kind of progressed throughout the tournament. And Florida fish progress really, really quickly. I've seen
Okay.
them go from dead of winter to let's go spawn in 2 days. So I always kind of kept that flipping thing honest. But the day three, it actually ended up working out. I think I had 15 pounds and moved up to 19th place. But moving up, I think I started day one in 88th place. So to move up to 19th place, man, that was huge for my season. Huge, great to get a check, get 2 checks in Florida, and kind of built the confidence, get that kind of
Abs-
train rolling going into the rest of the season.
Absolutely, man. No, great. Well, I mean, you're talking stuff again. I've never fished Florida. I've fished the Delta some, and the stuff you're talking about, a canal, a chatterbait, fish spawning under or under a mat, and there's tulies and whatever on the side. So like all this stuff is sounding very, very Delta like to
It
me.
is.
Um, what's some of the biggest takeaways maybe, and again, this Western segment being the connection in your eyes from Delta to Florida. What are maybe some of the biggest similarities and then also some of the
Mhm.
differences?
I mean, I feel like I am a good Florida fisherman because of the Delta. I understand grass, I understand tules, I understand how they set up and all these things, and it's super, super similar. Like hard spots, all that good stuff, shell beds, um, all that stuff. I literally take it to Florida with me, and it gives me a lot of confidence on how to break down those bodies of water and what to look for. Yeah, I truly feel like if you're a good Delta fisherman, you'll be at least comfortable in Florida. You know, it's
Mhm.
that similar. Um, yeah, I remember watching Mark Daniels Jr., Delta legend. Like, dude always caught him on the Delta, and I watched him always finish well in Florida, and I'm like, that makes sense. Like there is a correlation there. There's no doubt. If you're good on the Delta, you can catch them on Florida. The biggest difference I would say between the Delta and Florida is, like I said before, that progression is super fast in Florida. Like they move
Okay.
up, they spawn, they're done. The Delta, it's a little bit more drawn out. That movement, just because we don't have those super drastic weather changes like Florida has, like when it goes from 32 degrees and then 2 days later it's 80 again. We don't really have that a lot in the Delta.
California.
So
Yeah.
yeah, in California in general, exactly. So that progression is definitely a lot slower in the Delta than Florida, but that's the biggest thing.
Okay.
If you're good on the Delta, you'll be good in Florida. There's no doubt.
That's awesome. That's cool to hear. And, something I think about a lot is we talk a lot about all the stuff that Western guys have learned out west and take to the east with them fishing. But just
Hmm.
overarching general, now you're have spent a good amount of time in the central part of the country and the eastern part of the country fishing
Hmm.
on two different tours. And what I guess I'm curious about is what stuff that you've learned out doing the Eastern stuff that now, I mean, you're someone who's fishing 2 tours this year, fishing the Elite
Hmm.
Series and the Band 60, running 2 boats and flying and doing all the crazy stuff, you and Ish and Christian Ocean and whoever else is doing it. It's wild. But what, uh, what have you learned back east, or what are some of the biggest things you've learned back east that you bring back west now?
um, I don't say this very often, but the biggest thing that I've gotten from back east is forward facing sonar. I still believe, and it's weird because usually the West Coast is, we lead a lot of the new stuff. We really do. Um, a lot of the techniques, they originate in the West Coast and then they move east. Forward facing sonar, I still truly believe that a majority of West Coast anglers are still 1 to 3 years behind the East Coast. Um, they don't. And that being said, I think the fisheries are a little different. They're not as conducive to the dominance of forward facing sonar. Some are, Mojave, great example. Like if I wasn't using my Lowrance active target too, I was not catching those fish. There's no doubt in my mind. I think the three best guys with forward facing ended up in the top three, and that's not an accident there. But
Yep.
in the majority of Northern California, especially, forward facing is not as dominant yet. You can still compete without it. You can still use it kind of as a tool to go along with your, I hate to use the word conventional fishing, but fishing before forward facing sonar. I think you could still compete doing that, but I still think that the West Coast is behind as far as using forward facing to its truest potential.
Yeah. Man, I totally agree. I think it's catching up, but
It is.
my take on all of this was like I went and fished as a co-angler behind Spencer Sheffield on Champlain and was like,
That's a treat.
wow, learned like eyes open, right?
Yeah.
Like blew
Yeah.
my mind. and this was like, 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, like, it was a long time ago, and I felt like the same situation, like, in general, I would say the West Coast was way behind on forward facing that point. It's catching up. I'm seeing way more guys looking at their graphs now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I would say, and I would then go on to continue and talk about the Pacific Northwest, where Boomer and I fish a lot, is I would say to some degree is maybe even behind that slightly, like maybe 6 months or a year behind Northern
Yeah.
California and that because it just kind of trickles down, right? But like it's something that I've thought about too, and I've really tried to stay on top of because I agree, man. Like I think the clearest example is you look at um, the One Bass US Open every year
Mm-hmm.
of like all the guys from back east that come, like they all have done very well in it,
Very well.
and it's like, well, that's strange. These guys have been fishing Mojave or Mead for however long, and it's exactly that, right? And so I think, but I do think that like Don Pedro Pro Am this last week, like I saw a lot of guys looking at their forward facing rather than what's in front of them necessarily.
Yeah.
But it's
You had a great
but I
tournament, by the way. That was awesome. That was an
thank you,
awesome
man.
tournament, dude.
It's one of those where yeah, wish I had my second day back, and
Yeah.
that's I had was such in the catbird seat to win that thing, and broke off a big one, and then I should have had more behind me. But anyways,
Mm-hmm.
thank you, appreciate that. We'll get one of these days.
Oh yeah, it's coming. It's coming. You're too consistent, and that's what everybody told me. 10 years ago is like, yeah, you're always in the top 10, dude. It's coming. It's coming. You're like, when is
Yeah,
it coming? I'm ready. I'm ready. And no, it's definitely coming for you too. You're gonna pop one of these big ones for sure.
no, appreciate you. Well, on that topic, man, you are back in California. I mean,
Hmm.
going to the Classic, right?
Yep.
That'll be sweet to see you down there. Do you know is Boomer going at all? Is he sticking
I
around?
don't. I don't think he's gonna make it to the classic this year.
Good.
I think he's a little busy right now with the rod company, so good problem to have.
Good problem to have. That's good. Well, good. Well, the Serious Angler crew will be down there, and that is for anyone else listening. Come say hello to us. We'll be floating around. Certainly, we'll be in the Amped outdoors booth and be running around. So excited to see you down there. But other than that, man, is your next tournament the BAM on Don Pedro?
It is. It is. I am so ready for that. I feel like I haven't fished. I mean, the U.S. Open's the U.S. Open. I haven't fished like a normal, just pro am. I guess this isn't a pro am pro tournament on the West Coast in the springtime in probably, gosh, 6 years. Like
Mm.
it is, it's. I got on that plane and I immediately started thinking about Don Pedro and how excited I was to go get there, go compete against all the guys that I've competed my whole career against on the West Coast. Like I am so excited for that one. I cannot wait for that one to show up.
Dude, heck yeah. Cool. Cool. Well, I'm fired up for it too. And what a fishery, man. I have never I haven't been there until this last tournament, and man, I was impressed with it. I had a really, really good time and caught 2 personal bests, which is
That's
very
awesome.
rare. I mean, like, I've never really caught a big spot, and it wasn't a giant by any means, but I caught a 522 spot in
It's a
practice, and
big
that
one.
was
That's a
that was
big
my
one.
biggest spot ever, and then caught my biggest largemouth too. So it was I was like, "This place is cool, man. I like this place."
Yeah, Don Pedro. I don't get to go down there very often. I think I probably only fished 5 or 6 tournaments down there, but that whole
Yeah,
mother lode region is just so chock full of fish. It's not
yeah,
ever really hard to get a bite. It's nice to just go fish and catch them, and that's barring any crazy weather. I don't think the bite's going to get worse. I think it's only going to get better from here. So I'm
yeah.
super excited to just kind of go and lean on them for hopefully 3 days over there.
Yeah. Man, I'm excited. I've never fished in a format where there's no practice whatsoever. I mean, just rolling up and going, man.
Yeah, yeah, that one's. That one, I'll be honest, I'm a little nervous about that one. Very
Yeah.
rarely do I just show up in practice and start catching them. I've
Oh,
never
sick.
been that. I've never been that guy. You hear all these guys. They come back after day one, they're like, I found him. Like I'm on him. I caught the crap out of him today. Like I'm gonna smoke him. And I'm like, yeah, I got two bites today.
$100%.
It's always been kind of a process for me. I'm really good at eliminating water. I'm probably one of the best at it because I'm really good at finding bad water to start with, and it's just always taken me a little while to kind of dial things in. But this tournament, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to fish this format, is it's going to force me to make decisions quick, make adjustments really quick, and figure out those fish that day. Um, and like, I only think that can benefit me as an angler going forward. You know, having that pressure, knowing what guys have, knowing if guys are catching them, all that added pressure with no practice. It's going to force me to keep a really open mind, and it's going to force me to make. I think my problem always has been is I don't make adjustments very quickly. I like
Yep.
to make sure it's not working for some reason. Like, okay, I'm
Same.
gonna go throw. I haven't got bit for 2 hours, but I'm gonna give it one more hour just to make sure this isn't happening. And I won't have that opportunity in Super 60. Like, I gotta abandon ship quick when it's not working.
Dude, you are like, I this gives me hope that one day I somewhat close to the level of angler of Bryant Smith because your fishing style is the same way. Like when I find them in practice, it's like the last day of practice at 4 p.m. And I'm like, oh, sweet.
100%.
I found a couple of them. Nice. I got a
Hundred
starting
percent.
spot. Like
Yeah.
I
Now
am,
we got something to build on.
yeah, exactly. Like I am so good at eliminating water, and then I'm really good at just like wasting a bunch of time sticking around something that's not working.
Yeah, yeah, that's me.
So
That's me. I got to make sure it's not working. I got to, oh, I haven't got bit in 4 hours. Let me give this spot one more hour. I see them down there. They're gonna bite eventually. No.
say that's the thing. Yeah. No, I feel you, man. Like that's how I feel, and so I'm excited for that exact thing. Is like it's gonna really push me to just fish free and really move around and if I need to adjust and rather than get complacent. And I think, like you said, in regular tournaments where you do get practice and back on the elite series and things like that for yourself, it puts you in maybe a different mindset or build some confidence of really changing quick if you need to in a tournament situation.
Yeah, and it's funny too because in practice, like I said, I'll beat a dead horse. In a tournament, I'm a totally different angler. Um,
Mm,
like I make adjustments when I'm fishing to what I feel is my full capability. I make
mhm,
adjustments really, really quick, um, quicker than I do in practice. But for some reason, if I've always told myself I need to practice more how I play because that would totally help my practice. I would cover way more water. I would just keep rotating through things and just like I do at a tournament. Like I don't sit there in a tournament and watch myself die. I make
yeah.
sure I am going to do everything, make every adjustment that I possibly can, unless I'm super dialed in on something. Like I just keep trying stuff in tournaments, but for some reason I do not practice how I play, and I think this is definitely going to help me kind of do that.
Man, and I don't this is anecdotal in myself here, but I've thought about that lately too with myself the same way in practice where I spend so much time in an area. Like I looked at my first day of practice on Don Pedro the first time, it was like, dude, I've been in this bay since, it's 2 o'clock now. Like, what am I doing? Like, you know what I
I've
mean?
seen none of the lake.
Yeah, like I'm just sitting here and I think part of that, and this is just for me anyway, I've noticed that in the last couple of years with forward facing, is I get really zoned in at just
Yes.
looking around. at
Yeah.
everything. And whereas before any of that, like I felt like I did cover more water. Wasn't maybe as effective, and I covered, Sam Rayburn, I'll just run 60 miles. I'm like, what am I
Yeah.
doing? But I feel like that has really slowed me down, and I agree. I need to maybe push the gas pedal a little more often in practice when it's a practice situation.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And same thing has happened to me. The forward facing has definitely slowed me down big time. But it's just something that I have to learn. Like this whole forward facing thing has been a giant learning process, and that's one thing that I definitely need to work on. It just because I see the fish doesn't mean that they're going to bite. Doesn't mean that I need to be there. And growing up, I was always the guy. We'll take Shasta for example. If I'm
Okay.
fishing Shasta, I'm fishing. I'm making two casts on a point, and I'm leaving. I'm going to try and fish as many points as possible throughout that day.
Okay.
That's how I've always fished. Clearly, same thing. If I'm like, okay, there's a dock pattern, I'm going to fish as many docks as I can and put those odds in my favor to get it in front of the most active fish. I don't want to sit there. I've never been the guy that sits there and tries to figure out why they're not biting or what I can do to get them to bite. I just leave and go find more active fish.
Right.
Forward facing has definitely slowed me down over these past couple of years because now I know they're there and I try to figure out how to get them, just like what you were saying. You try to figure out how to get them to bite when in reality, you just need to move on. You just need to go find a different area, do a different pattern, whatever it may be. So that is definitely one big learning process that I'm still going through. There's no doubt. Like a horribly embarrassing example of that would be Okeechobee. I launched my boat, and I'm like, this is the first time I've ever really done the scout mode thing, the perspective for Lowrance.
Yep.
And I'm looking around. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. Like, this is so cool. I can see everything. Like, there's the reed clump. And then I see this bed, this giant bed, and I have no idea that the tilapia are spawning right now. Like, just completely over my head. I'm like, oh, there's a good one in that hole. I swear to you, I fished for this fish for a half hour before I finally kind of poked up there and I see this giant white thing with the big googly eyes. I'm like, a half hour of my life that I just spent fishing for a tilapia. So
And you
it
couldn't
gets
get
you.
to bite either. Like you couldn't.
No, I
It
never got it to
was
bite. I never got it to bite. Like they don't, dude. They are the worst parents in the world. They just completely. You get close to their eggs, and they just completely bolt. They have no
like,
care in the world. You guys are on your own. Sorry, I'm out. But this fish, I've literally fished for a tilapia on a bed for a half hour. Like just a complete idiot.
dude, that is hilarious. It's tough out here on the streets for the tilapia kids, man. They're out here battling.
uh, the worst
That's
part
awesome.
was there was a huge tilapia. Like I guess they spawned before, and all the tilapia fry was lining the banks and inches of water. Like that was the only place that they could go to where there's clear water, and they
Okay.
felt like there's a little bit of safety. Hey, dude, every single fish that was under 2 pounds was on the bank eating the tilapia fry. I'm not kidding you. The tilapia fry are this big. And I sat in one area on the lake for probably an hour, and the entire little bay, the whole edge of it was just little tilapia fry dying. Like it's
Being
incredible.
eaten by what? By bluegills and bass and everything?
Bass, bluegill, mudfish, gar, birds.
They're
Like
just getting
I'm sure a few gators smoked a few. Like everything was eating the tilapia. So I guess I guess I should kind of be impressed. Like if you do see a tilapia that's like 3 or 4 pounds, I'm like you made it through the gauntlet. Your parents clearly abandoned you. You made it through getting eaten, and you're here. So good for you.
yeah, you maybe need to tip the cap to
Yeah,
adult tilapia more often.
yeah. Like he's had a rough life, but he made it.
But he made it. Success story. That's hilarious. Oh. Well, man, I think we kind of get close to wrapping things up here, but tell the folks I've been seeing, and I've listened to a couple of your episodes now. It's just hilarious the banter between you and Boomer,
what? What?
and Bo for that matter, just cracks me up. But give some folks some background on Alpha Basscast.
Yeah, that's our. I guess you could call it a podcast. It's kind of more of a another word show. It's just us. You know, we're trying to, just like you guys at Serious Angler with the Serious Western. We're just trying to grow the sport on the West Coast. We want, you know, we got our roots here. This is where I started. This is where, you know, Jake started, where Bo started. We just want to, you know, kind of talk about the West Coast and try to keep it relevant, because there's a ton of great anglers. There's a huge angler base in the West Coast, and a lot of times I feel like we kind of get forgotten by the mainstream, if you want to call it, the national media, bass fishing media. And, you know, we just wanted to show some love and, you know, kind of build bass fishing back up on the West Coast because, I mean, it's not gone by any means. You know, it's had a few rough years, just like everybody has. And if we could spread some more positivity, kind of bring a spotlight to West Coast fishing, I mean, that's what our goal is, and just try to keep building West Coast fishing. So more guys have opportunities like I've had. You know, I've been super blessed to be able to come up on the West Coast and actually make it to the national circuit. Like I want to see more West Coast guys on national circuit. I want to see Bam Super 60, like just killing it. I want to see One Bass doing really well. Um, because they, you know, that's where I grew up. So that was our main goal with it. And, you know, I get to give Jake a bunch of crap too. So, that's always a fun time making fun of him. I always enjoy that. Kind of one of
Yeah,
my hobbies that I do on the side.
I love it. I love it. It's always the most fun giving Jake crap. I think that's one of my favorite things to do. That's good.
It is. He's such an easy target.
He's such an easy target. Gosh, he is. He's like, yeah, I was walking by and I heard like that you caught a 10 or something. I was like, Adam, it couldn't be Adam. There's no way. And he's like, you caught a 10. I'm like, shut up, Jake.
Yeah. Just
I
shut
could
up.
catch a 10 every once in a while, maybe.
Oh, he's such a clown.
He is. Well, sweet, man. Well, I'm looking forward to hanging with you and with Jake and Bo and all those guys. Certainly some more with the Super 60. Will be really cool. Bailey is going to come out to those events. He will be at this next one, and we're going to do a live show after with the winner in the top 10, or certainly the winner at least, kind of after Championship Sunday, whoever that may be. So
That's awesome.
excited to push more of the Western stuff with Serious Angler, and that's a huge goal of ours as well. So great to see that, and the more eyes, the better, and we can just push more of the West Coast.
Heck yeah. That's what it's all about, man. Growing the sport. That's what we're here for.
Heck yeah! All right, man. Well, have a great rest of your night.
All right. You do the same.